Howdy folks, and welcome back to the channel, welcome back to the very first episode of this new short tutorial series for War in the East 2. Having completed, let's say, the what I called the tutorial for beginners, I think it's time to kind of to start this advanced tutorial series in which, as one of you asked me in one comment under my very first War in the East 2 video, to make this, because one of you asked me, I don't remember precisely what, but it was something like how to use your panzer divisions, how to move the infantry, how to move these, how to use that. So I said, okay, fine, let's do this short tutorial series in which I kind of combine together multiple let's say elements from multiple beginner tutorials to see what can we conclude by making this kind of collage of different information taken from different basic tutorials. I will also go through some new aspects that, in my opinion, it's worth giving in the advanced tutorial series rather than in the beginner tutorial series. And the topics of today are indeed attacks and ZOCs. ZOC stands for Zone of Control. Now, attacking. Briefly, before attacking, and I'm using these as the turn one of the Grand Campaign as the axis. You want to maximize the amount of information that you know in regard to the enemy hexes. Briefly, you gain this by conducting combat recon missions, and combat recon missions are, of course, performed by recon planes during the air execution phase, and the goal is to gather as much information as possible from enemy units. Why is this? Well, because during the ground battle, the combat value of the attacker and the combat value of the defender changes based on what you know of the enemy unit. And if you want to kind of pre-simulate an attack, please don't mind the values, these are exaggerated. I will show you why in a separate episode at the end of this tutorial series. But when you select one of your unit and you hover the mouse on top of an enemy unit, you see here attacker value 202 and defender value 6.3. And then when you go at the bottom of the info box, you see the 124th Rifle Division that has an attacking value of 1.0 and a defensive value of 6.3. Now, this is kind of the an estimate of the combat value of the defender. Throughout the battle, the combat value can change based on the commitment of reserve units, of support units, of fortifications, and equally the CV of the attacker can change based on the commitment of air support and support units. And also, when you so let's try to launch an attack here. Now we see here we have an attacking value of 70.7 and a defender value of 0, because we know that there is a unit, but we don't know which unit is this one. And this is important because when you want to attack somewhere, you want to know, you want to have, as I said, as much information as possible in regard to the enemy unit. So this is, let's say, the pre-attacking phase. Now, about the attack per se, and yeah, let's close this one. Sorry, this is the way to see the recon values. You see, for instance, here you have a recon axis 18. Here you have a recon axis 20. Here you have 55. Here you see the more a recon value you have, the lighter the hex become, while here you have 0. You have no recon, you have no idea of what's in here, basically. Now, there are two types of attacks and attack. Sorry. And when you select your unit and you hover the mouse on top of an enemy unit, you see here, hold down Shift key for deliberate attack. The default attack, with the one that also, as you can see, looks like is highlighted here by this arrow, and the small explosion symbol is called the Hasty attack. While if you press Shift, you see that the symbol changes into a big explosion, and you see here deliberate attack. And also you see one thing here. You see this circle with a number inside. This number indicates the combat delay, so the penalty that you have to pay in terms of movement points if you want to enter into this hex. Hasty attacks, let's say, are attacks made with a compromise of firepower for movement, while deliberate attack are exactly the opposite. They allow a much higher firepower at a cost of movement points. And there are many more differences between conducting a hasty attack and conducting a deliberate attack. And for this, let me just exactly. For this reason, I have again prepared the famous Excel sheet, and here we are. So I summarized basically all what is known about hasty and deliberate attacks. Briefly, combat value in the case of a hasty attack, this is divided by 2, so it's halved. Losses, when you do a hasty attack, they are generally, so take this with a pinch of salt, they are generally higher for the attacker and lower for the defender. Now, this is heavily affected by the terrain and by the weather. Yeah, again, take this with a pinch of salt. The recon in force, also known as scouting. This occurs when you perform a hasty attack, let's say in this hex here, where you know you have an enemy unit, but you don't have too many information about this enemy unit. And if the combat value of the defender turns out to be too high, and if your leader has a good initiative skill point, then what your general is doing is to recalling back your attacking troops to prevent, let's say, useless losses. And the outcome of this battle is also known as recon in force. And in the, let's say, if you go here, you go on ground battles only, and oh, this one was, no, that was, yeah. Instead of this, you will see enemy forces were scouted, basically. Combat delay. Now, I mentioned the combat delay in the let's say graphic section of the attacks, but here is the table that summarizes the combat delay that you will get after an attack. Now, the combat delay depends not only on the type of attack, but also on the final odds ratio between the two combat values. And again, if we have a look like at this one, I know that the ratio is much higher than 100, but for simplicity reasons, every combat ratio that is higher than 100 is just approximated at 100. So you see here I have 30,000 versus 4, and of course I am winning. So this is the final combat ratio between the attacker and the defender. Now, when this combat ratio is below 10-1, you suffer 1 combat delay point during an hasty attack. If this is below 5-1, during a deliberate attack, you suffer 3 combat delay points. And this is how you have to read these two columns. In light blue, they're all referred to hasty attacks. In red, they are referred to deliberate attacks. And yeah, 0 point if it's above 10, like in this case, and 2 points if it's between 5 to 1. If it's either equal or 2 5 to 1, or below 10 to 1, or 0 points if either, exactly as I said, the attack fails, or you get anyway 1 point even if it's above 10 to 1. Now, the engineer's combat value. This is, I mentioned it here, but it will come. I will return to it in the tutorial about taking Sevastopol, Odessa, and Leningrad. When you want to attack heavily fortified positions, always go with a deliberate attack, because if you go with a hasty attack, the, let's say, combat value of the engineers is divided by 4, and this is a huge penalty. It's enormous. Just never do it, basically. One important difference between hasty attacks and deliberate attacks is that actually this is wrong. Sorry, I don't know why I flipped them. Multiple hexes. So can you combine units from multiple hexes? If you do a hasty attack, you can only attack with the stack from 1 hex. And how you do it is very simple. You go to the movement phase and you select the first unit, and then you press shift and you select the other unit. Now, as you remember, you have these 2 golden squares, which means that both of the units present here have been selected, and you also see it here on the map. And then you can perform a hasty attack, while vice versa, you can include multiple hexes when you want to perform a deliberate attack. And this can be done in, let's say, 2 ways. You can, when you select the units in 1 hex, you can go on the yeah, exactly. So just 1 way. Sorry, you can press. You have to press shift, and then you move the mouse over the other hexes from which you want to launch the attack. Like in this case, I have included the 3 regiments of the 56 infantry divisions, and then when I press, in this case, shift on this hex, I can launch a deliberate attack from 2 different hexes. The movement cost, again, this is referred exclusively to the attacks. There are also movement costs related to the terrain and to whether the enemy has a zone, exerts a zone of control. But basically, hasty attacks, as I mentioned before, they compromise firepower for movement points, because the amount of movement points that your units suffer are 3 movement points for motorized units versus 16, and 2 movement points versus 6 in the case of non-motorized units. And the last point is the commitment of support units. In the case of hasty attacks, and hasty attacks is one, if not the reason of why they are very convenient in the very first turn of the campaign, is because you have all the HQs close by to the front line, and support units of the HQs can be committed only if the HQ has not expended a single movement point. While in the case of deliberate attacks, you can support units can be committed even after the HQ has moved, say, has performed some movements. And in the case of some, I would say, special units like the Soviet artillery divisions, they can even attack from 2 hexes away, or yeah, they can be 2 hexes behind the enemy one to perform a deliberate attack. And yeah, so these kind of summarizes the differences between hasty and deliberate attacks. One important point that has been changed between the, let's say, original release of the game and some other patches is the reduction of combat preparation points. Don't read the manual, the original manual, because it's wrong. In the original manual, it says that every attack consumes 50% of CPP. Now, that's wrong. This has been changed finally. And you see here, if the final odds is below 20, then you get a 50% reduction in both cases. If it's between or equal to 20 and below 35.1, you get a different percent of reduction. If it's equal or between 35.1 and 50, you get 20 and 30% of reduction, while if it's above 50, you get only a 10% reduction for hasty attacks and 25% reduction for a deliberate attack. And in regard to the outcome of the attacks, you see here units can surrender, units can retreat, or units can be routed. Now, surrender is easy. The unit disappears from the map. Retreat is again intuitive because the unit just falls back. While routed is kind of in between the surrendering and the retreating. And I have compiled again here in the magic Excel sheet all the information that I think are important to understand how routed units work. They do not receive replacements until they are recovered in the next logistics phase. They do not exert zones of control. They lose one morale point. They don't have SMPs. They do not prevent fortification decay. They have a combat value of 0. They cannot build up, break down, or merge. Like the build up is like when you have a unit like this in the regiments and they are all three in the same hexes, you can press B and they will build up again in the same parental unit. If isolated, like these units here, like exactly routed units do have this yellow stripe and the R in the left upper hand corner. These are all routed units. When they are isolated and they suffer from attrition because they have a low TOE, sorry, they have a low TOE because they suffer from attrition, they can surrender in the next battle. If they are stacked, like I think in this case here, and there is a battle going on here, the routed unit will be shattered, will surrender on the next turn, and they are automatically displaced when a unit gets closer to them. And this forced displacements increases the attrition and the TOE reduction on the routed unit. So yeah, keep this in mind, especially if you are playing as the Soviets on the Grand Campaign, on turn 1 of the Grand Campaign, that routed units, you will have plenty of routed units and they do have all these problems. And the last thing is the so-called zone of control. The zone of control is like the power projection that units do have on the surrounding hexes. And the 286th Security Division is a good example of this one. Only, let's say, divisions and the Soviets rifle, tank and mechanized corps can exert. And also the security regiments, like this one here, they can exert a zone of control, while all the German divisions and I think even the brigades do have a zone of control. And imagine that these are like, they are controlled by this division, by this unit, because imagine this division sending out patrols in all the surrounding directions, and these patrols are, let's say, reclaiming control of these hexes, and this is called the zone of control. Now, why is this important during attacks? Well, because besides for a rule of the very first turn of the Grand Campaign here, units exerting a zone of control will impose a penalty on every unit passing by their zone of control, which means that when you want to attack, you always want to have at least, like I've done here, a 3 hexes wide region, because of the zones of control. Unless you're willing to spend more movement points, but it's really not worth it. And that's it, my friends, for this advanced tutorial. Thank you very much for watching, thank you very much for supporting the channel, and I wish you all the best, and I hope to see you all in the next advanced tutorial episode.